Hello, everyone. Well, this is a very special day, and I've been waiting for this for the last couple of days that I've had this brilliant idea to bring on Pamela Wilson. And so today, as we record this episode of Frontrunners Innovate, it is International Women's Day 2024. And I have a gift for all of you women and men, of course, who are working hard to create great solutions for your business, for the world, and while caregiving someone that you love. So today's guest is a resource for caregivers, someone with answers to the questions that you may have that will make a difference to your life. Questions about insurance, when to make big and difficult decisions, and maybe how to have those difficult conversations with your loved ones. Maybe when it's time to get paid caregiving help, and maybe the legal responsibilities of caregiving, among other things. I personally have been a caregiver in this role, maybe now off and on, and maybe also in the future more so. So I have a personal interest in this, and I will say this, in about a week's span of time over the last week, at least 5 times in just regular business calls, I heard people bring up the caregiving scenario that they were having, mostly with parents. One time with a child that wasn't quite adult, but a teenager. And it was amazing the way that they brought it up, and they felt comfortable to talk about it with me because they knew me. So I felt like now's the time. And what better time than International Women's Day, when most women wear more than one hat. And so we want to get to that person, whether it be male or female, that is wearing more than one hat, and one of those hats being the caregiving hat. So Pamela is an international caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker out of Denver, Colorado. She hosts and produces the Caring Generation podcast. That tells it all, doesn't it? She answers questions on that podcast from caregivers. It's a YouTube channel that she also has that she can answer those questions. She is the author of The Caregiving Trap, which is a book, and it's Solutions for Life's Unexpected Changes. Boy, that's a mouthful, and that is a load right there, because most of the times when we find ourselves in caregiving situations, it's really not anticipated. There's not a long runway before you find out that that's what you're doing. She's also the Caregiver, an online course, Support Caring for Aging Parents. So along with Pamela, I have a really good friend that I've invited to join me. Her name is Tsegga Medhin, and she is a front runner and has been for quite some time. She's also in North Carolina, established in the Research Triangle Park area. She's a diversity and inclusion expert and a girls empowerment leader. Tsegga is the founder of the Pearl Leadership Institute and formerly North Carolina's UN Women's President. Welcome to you both. I'm so excited that you're here. And while this was a short time span for me to figure out to put this together, it has really been long in my head. And long in my head because I've been there, done that. And I kept hearing about it off and on. But like I say, in 1 week period of time, when you can call it God or somebody, the universe conspired to put all these people in my life to say, wow, I've been dealing with some stuff this past week. Hence, I literally did a Google search, and Pamela, you were the first person to come up, and immediately I knew you're the one I needed to talk to. So thank you for responding so quickly. I'm going to go to Tsegga first. I want to have her introduce herself. If people haven't been watching, she's been a co-host, and we've interviewed her before a few times. People are going to recognize her maybe, but I want her to introduce herself first, and then we're going to come to you, Pamela, and talk to you about your background. But Tsegga, do a little intro, if you will.
Well, thank you. Thank you, ladies, and happy International Women's Day. This is a day of recognizing the great work that women do, past and present, as I am in your company. A privilege to be with all of you, and especially all your subscribers and all the people that watch your podcast. Mary and I see Pamela has her own podcast, so we'll be following as well. I'm Tsegga Medhin, and I thank you again for being here with all of you. My interest has always had the focus on gender, and gender as we tend to see where we've been and where we're going. Obviously, today's conversation is going to be about care and caregiving, as you mentioned, but I'm a sustainable development goal advocate. And so I do work in that space because I find that women specifically in the STEM arena, science, technology, engineering, and math. Science, because that's where the living wages are for women specifically, and for people that are underrepresented. And A stands for arts, where the innovation happens. So there is like a great connection for us. And so I've been part of the UN Women of North Carolina, and connecting with the Sustainable Development Goal plans at the UN itself. So I'm looking forward to our conversation and find out exactly where we could make the impact. And again, thank you, both change makers.
Thank you, Tsegga. I appreciate that. Pamela, I have to know, what is the why? What brought you into the line of work that you're in? You're young. It's hard to imagine that you've already been experiencing some caregiving. Maybe you've seen it up close. I don't know. But give us a little bit about your background and what brought you to this work.
So it was really my mother, and I'll just share a story. So my mother was very practical, methodical about things. She had lost her mother when she was 5 years old, and she raised 2 brothers and a sister. So the first funeral I went to, I was 5 years old, to my grandfather's funeral. She took me.
Wow.
Took me up to the casket, touched him, she explained life and death to me. And then in my teens, my mother began getting sick. She had heart disease. She had just a number of conditions because she smoked, and because of all these, what I call adverse childhood events that she experienced, the death of her father, having to take care of her siblings. She got married young. Her first husband died. She had a child. So all of these things for people in all walks of life build up. So she was sick with heart disease when I was in my teens. My oldest sister was killed in a car accident when I was 17. I saw the effect of that on my parents. My mother saying, children are supposed to lose parents. Parents are not supposed to lose children. So she went on in the years, I got the call Sunday night to drive her to the hospital because she wasn't feeling good. She ended up passing away when I was 35. My father passed away 4 years later, and my brother passed away within a year of my father of leukemia. And I just watched all this and participated in all of this. And we as a family made so many mistakes. We children made assumptions about who was going to care for mom and dad and who was going to live longer and all of that. And all of the assumptions we made were wrong. And we didn't ask the right questions of the healthcare system and all of that. So that's really what drove me to make a career shift from corporate America into caregiving and health and aging.
That's a lot of, let's just say, life experience.
It is, but
at a very young age.
But it was good life experience. People will say, oh, that's horrible that you lived through all that. It's like, yes, it is, but I did something with it.
Yeah, you did. You absolutely did. So give us a little snapshot of what you're doing now, because you have a breadth of what you've done with your experience, that you've broadened into several different spaces that touch on, I would say, caregiving, but almost bridge into the end of life experience for some people. So just if you can give us a snapshot of what you are doing.
Sure. So today, mostly I do education and consulting. So I do individual consulting, family caregivers all over the world. I do consulting for corporations and a lot of education for corporations, especially their employee resource groups. And the reason I can do this is because my first company was an in-home care agency. Then I moved into care management and professional fiduciary work. I was a medical financial power of attorney. I was the person who had to make decisions for my clients from the moment I met them to the end of life.
Wow. That's a heavy responsibility.
It was for 11 years.
So what I like about this, and sorry,
no, go ahead.
I think it's that how we are adjusting our priorities and how do we do it differently, I think, for every case and every situation. So finding that's where you are, I think it makes me feel that, for one thing, I'm seeing that we are not alone in anything. Myself as a caregiver, obviously, as I said, I have family members that have not been well for quite some time, and I'm particularly interested in exactly how things are done and how differently they're done. And obviously, even the audience for this podcast, for Mary and all of us, it's always good to do it the way you want to do it. But I think also adapting to the different situation and different conditions of people that you died. So That's what I was trying to see, especially on the women's side. It seems like the caregiving seems to be it tilts on a heavier side for women than it is for men. I mean, men do care for family as well. I've seen it happen. I've seen it in many ways, but I think I'm looking forward to this conversation to have that understanding and future planning and strategic alignment with it.
Yeah,
There is no one right way.
Yeah, there's no guidebook, and when you find yourself in that situation, it really depends on family dynamics and what's going on. I think the thing is nobody ever looks at their life and says, "Oh, I'm going to be a caregiver someday. I need to figure out what that looks like for me down the road." But I think there are some things you can do to prepare for that when you get to a certain age, or maybe you sense mom and dad's getting a little bit older, even though they're healthy now, or that there's, some kind of illness that runs in your family that you need to look at. I was thinking the other day, I probably need to call my brother who has always had trouble with his back and let him know that now I have been diagnosed with, degenerative disc disease, the same as my mother had, and go, oh, well, there might be a reason why you have that, by the way. And, kind of pass that along, to pass that kind of information along. But what do you consult with families and kind of that maybe see something coming, see the train coming in their way, and how they might be able to prepare?
Because of my breadth of experience and everything that I've been through, which, I tell people there's the average, right? And then there's like the 0.5% instances, because I've done this so long, I've had those. So I can kind of see what's coming, but I try to look at both sides, right? So, because the caregivers are always burned out and exhausted, and I'm like, yes, but the care receiver is also going through a lot too. So I try to be very balanced about talking about the stresses that both parties experience.
Right. I think that, if I look back and think about things too, from the standpoint at my age, also, if you're married to somebody who's a little bit older than you, and I am, is having all your documents lined up ahead of time. And I think you don't think about those things until you actually have to. And it gets to be a little bit crazy if you wait that late. But thinking, everybody knows you're supposed to think about those things, but then you don't really get active with that until you get to that point. I think there's different scenarios that we probably need to talk about there. And I don't know if Tsegga has a scenario she'd like to throw up, but I know that we talked about some yesterday. And the one thing about Pamela is that she has worked across, all across the United States, but into global spaces. So she has examples from other areas of the world that she has worked with, which I think is very interesting. So, Tsegga, do you have a scenario or a question you want to ask right off the bat?
Yes, thank you. And so, even before COVID-19, we are exposed to a glaring gaps in the infrastructure of caring for the elderly or whoever is not well. And so and obviously this, because this is we need to have a systemic approach to something that really is not working. What are your suggestions as far as the systemic approach to the service of care, the inequality between males and females, especially in the unpaid care of work that's been done? How do companies, how do you connect with organizations where they need to have the paid care, all those kinds of systemic infrastructure that need to be placed, including, in the case of Mary, where she works, she's part of the elderly.
The Governor's Advisory Council.
And that's about policy. Could you touch onto some of those things in terms of systems and systemic kind of infrastructure related assistance or knowledge and education, as you mentioned? How does that work?
So I'm going to start very broad and then I'll narrow it down. So the healthcare system has different objectives than family caregivers, right? The healthcare system goes by CMS guidelines, and they have all these rules and regulations that they have to do. And God bless doctors, they're overworked, they're overstressed, there's not enough of them. The caregivers, on the other hand, are dealing with like the day-to-day stuff, right? And so caregivers tend to go into the emotional, right? Because emotional things are happening that are stressing them out. So in the perspective of like caregivers and healthcare and clinical, it's kind of a mismatch because caregivers want to go in and they want to be heard. Doctors have 15 minutes. They need the facts. They don't want emotions. They need to know, did somebody have high blood pressure? Is there a temperature? What's going on? I need this stuff to be able to help you. So we have that mismatch going on. But the great thing that's happening is CMS this year is starting to deal with social determinants of health, which are all the things that affect health. So food insecurity, the fact that people need transportation to doctor appointments, maybe caregivers are having to cut back on their work. So the clinical side is kind of moving over to the caregiver side to start recognizing these things, but we have so far to go. When I talk to corporations and their employee resource groups, a lot of those caregivers are trying to ask, how do I balance work and my family and my kids and my parents and caregiving? And I need to keep this job, right? Because I am the financial support for all these people. They're so busy that they don't have time for themselves. So that's another issue that we deal with day to day is the caregivers become sicker than the people that they care for because they don't have time to go to the doctor. And, some caregivers are like, I don't even have time to take a shower today, Pamela. How am I going to do all this, right? So I talk a lot about just the stresses that people experience and the crazy stories because it's unexpected, it's unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And as a caregiver, you're always worrying about the next thing that's going to happen.
What do you need to know about insurance or, because I think the financial part of this is really big that comes in, who's going to pay for what? How does that work with somebody who maybe needs to eventually, that they eventually maybe they need to go to memory care and that's private pay in the US anyway, private pay situation. How does that, how do you advise people to think about that?
So here in the US, the fact that Medicare doesn't pay for all care is shocking to people, right? Everybody assumes, gosh, once I turn 65, it's all going to be taken care of. That is not the case. Only your clinical going to the doctor, going to the hospital is taken care of. And then you still have copays and deductibles, right? But so for caregivers who are concerned about financially being able to pay for care eventually, I recommend that people honestly look into Medicaid as soon as possible. Get involved in local community hubs that have services. Every county has an aging department of services that have a lot of resources. You have to almost prepare for what you cannot even imagine is going to happen by doing a lot of research up front so that you are prepared. Because Medicaid has a 5-year look back period, they have qualifications, there's paperwork that can take months, depending on the state that you live in. It could take a year to get an application approved. You cannot wait until the last minute to plan for the fact that care is eventually going to be unaffordable for everybody. And there are some states that are doing mandatory long-term care insurance plans. State of Washington already has done that. So like people have payroll deductions for Medicare and Social Security, they have a deduction for long-term care, and New York and California are working on it. I imagine it's going to eventually be the whole United States once we get there.
Right. And it's crazy expensive. Like you said, it's memory care is up there. Just regular nursing care is ridiculously expensive.
$300 to $500 a day. Yeah, it depends on very different by state, but
and that's if you can get
a day.
in. The wait lists are usually I know somebody who waited almost a year to get their spouse in. And to somebody somewhere local to where he could see her, regularly. So Tsegga?
Waitlist, staffing shortages. I mean, everything post-COVID has gotten more difficult, not easier.
Yeah, it has not been easy. And I think I attest to that one. And really, we're trying to find some solutions. And it was really a tough condition. I think you said the 5-year
look back
was kind of intensive. And obviously, I didn't even know. So it's good to know now, not only for the people that I care for, but even for ourselves and finding out ways to make sure that, how do we really have this, that we need to understand that there are some comprehensive and coordinated policies that are being implemented, and there is a framework for this that we all need to be aware of. So I'm glad you're touching on that one. And so one of the things that I'm also concerned about is that, as you know, there is the silver tsunami where we see more people becoming 65 every day. And that's, you know, we have a professor here that talks about that quite frequently at UNC Chapel Hill, Dr. Johnson. And it is quite, you know, he brings all his research to the community, but it's more like a fear. For me, it's like you are almost scared. There is like some kind of fear about this. Instead, I think when we are armed with so much information, that there is also how do we mitigate that risk of seeing this kind of issue that's happening? We have a lot more senior citizens than we have younger people. I think there is the birth rate in
It's going down.
Yeah, the birth rate is down, and the silver tsunami is growing, as you can see right here. So
there's so much research about that. Well, and even what are called solo agers, right? So people who maybe have gotten divorced, or they've lost a spouse and they're widowed, maybe they never had kids. Who on earth is going to take care of us, right? I mean, that's a looming question. And so there are actually builder communities who are building communities for solo agers, where people can go and live in a community and find ways to have care. So the best thing for all of us really is to honestly have the hard conversation and say, okay, one day I am going to be older, I'm going to need care. And who is that person going to be? Is it going to be, do I have family? Do I have friends? If I don't, how am I going to find somebody to hire? And is there going to be money to hire? So, you know, for younger people who have their lives ahead of them, you know, long-term care insurance is affordable. For people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, it's almost unaffordable these days.
Yeah.
So you really have to start having these conversations early in your family, because you're a caregiver the minute you have children, right? This is not like something that happens magically when you're 50 or 60. You've been caring for children all your life. You have a spouse, you're kind of a caregiver for a spouse. Then your parents show up, and then you as a person need care. So we have to be thinking about it, and more conversations about it. It's not talked about generally in public. We don't like to talk about aging or death or any of this. We have to start having more conversations about this, which is why I was so excited to be invited to this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm also curious to know if there is a, like, for example, I think Mary is obviously quite engaged, as I said, in the governor's space. But I would also like to see, I've been reading about this ever since there was a chance for me to talk to you about this information you're sharing. How do we engage the city council? How do we engage the urban planners that they can incorporate care services in the city master plans? You know, North Carolina, Raleigh, Cary, where both Mary and I live, seems to be really growing fast. And so there is a need for this kind of conversation at a policy level. So how do we really mitigate that risk by having master plans, municipalities and cities? How do we really have even that environment that is going to be conducive for all of us to live in a place where there is care, there is availability, resources, and things like that? Because it's very limited, and it's even worse for the communities that are underrepresented.
And very rural too. So I think that people need to understand what people don't understand, people in general population, they don't understand that, and I hate to say this, but the government controls healthcare through CMS, through the payers, through the hospital systems, okay? So general consumers have no idea, because our companies provide healthcare insurance, right? So we don't know that there's this connection between the fact that we have to start speaking up. So mostly the people who speak up are the people who are represented here, right? We are involved in healthcare. So we go to the policy meetings, we speak up. We need to pull in more caregivers and more real life use cases and stories of people, and have them talk to their legislators about all that they're experiencing, because there is so much, but we who work in this industry can't do it all. Consumers have to realize that they have to get involved. So on my YouTube channel, I'll have people complain about, you know, the government and healthcare all the time. And I'm like, you have to get involved. If you don't get involved, it's not going to change. So we have to encourage the general public to get involved. That's what's going to move the needle.
Here on the islands, where I live, the 22-mile Long Island, on the coast of North Carolina, there is a community called Pine Knoll Shores. And I don't know if the mayor is the one that instigated it. I kind of think it was, she's passed away now, but she was mayor some time ago. And she had it in her heart to work on an aging community, just like what Tsegga is talking about. An actual development of little apartments that actually incorporated these types of pseudo services. I mean, not all the way to the level of, extreme healthcare or anything, but just, things that made it easier, one floor, disability enabled, spaces and that sort of thing, and inclusive, like marketplace right there, these sorts of things. From that, there's been a spinoff of they organize themselves. That's all I can say. Their own group for aging gracefully or whatever in their community, and they have put together their own resource list of localized resources in the greater, like Tri-County area to address aging, needs, whether that be, accommodations, whether that be healthcare, whether that be caregiving resources. It does include the aging division, from the state that has the regional and the, localized folks too that you mentioned. And a lot of it's heavy on the memory care side of things, because there's a lot of folks, odd as it may be, there's a lot of folks down here that have some level of dementia. When they get to a certain age, seem to have that. We just have an older population that lives here in their second homes and whatnot, have retired here. So they've included a lot of that. And so they're advancing with their own kind of plan, whether that was, mayor ordained, whether or not she put together that committee a long time ago to start looking at these things because it was of her personal interest or what. But I think if we could encourage town planners and mayors, officials, get a hold of somebody's ear who is either aging themselves, has somebody who they're caregiving at home, or understands the issues, and ask them to create a committee, municipal committee, appointed committee. They have the authority to do so, and start it from there to be able to actually make it a platform that somebody runs on.
There are here in Denver, there's co-housing examples. So there's examples of like little HOA groups, right? Where people are aging in place, and those groups are starting their own little grassroots community saying, okay, we're an HOA. If we need caregiving services, who do we go to? Who do we do this? Neighborhoods here in Denver are also doing the same thing, because they realize that they may not have kids, or there may be nobody. So all of these people living in these, areas together are forming their own little groups, so that if I need help one day and I'm sick, I'm going to call, this person, and they're going to send somebody over to check on me. It's got to be
Neighbors
grassroots.
looking after neighbors. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's critical in a place where, especially where there's we're a tourist area, where it's and retirement community. There might be somebody living here, like I was telling you the other day, that their nearest relative is states away, far away. So
I had a lady, I was a court-appointed guardian, and Routt County here in Colorado is Steamboat Springs. They had never appointed a person to be guardian. And there was a woman here who lived way out, 20 miles out of town, right? No family, no nothing, and really not a lot of services here in Steamboat Springs. I went to a local faith-based church and I said, look, Pastor, I need 7 women, 1 woman a day to go visit this lady. She lives way the heck out there. I was able to find volunteers to help her because she had dementia, until I was able to move her to Metro Denver. So sometimes faith-based communities, I mean, there's so much out there, but you have to be willing to go ask and to seek it out, and to vet people, obviously, make sure they're the right people to be helping out. But rural towns, I mean, there's so many gaps that need to be addressed.
Pamela, one of the questions that I have, I'm glad we're talking about the elderly care, but also there's another issue that I'm finding, employers usually before used to be very generous with employer-supported childcare, right? And it's very expensive. It's not only expensive to have a childcare center, obviously, from many, many aspects. But I think there's an employer that is here, SAS, obviously, Mary, working for SAS, it's the best of the best locally, because they have like a childcare center and things like that. This has not been really has almost diminished only because we see that many of the employers right now are allowing you to stay home. But staying home doesn't mean you have to be a babysitter, a spouse if you are in a relationship with a partner, and then also a caregiver to, and also a worker. So, and it's a very expensive thing. So how are we looking at that from a policy perspective, and also from ways when you're consulting with companies, is that a possibility for it to come back again so that employees can give the productivity level that employer wants, at the same time managing the care for their children, whether it is with some kind of incentive or deductions or anything like that? Where do you see that happening, and how does that work in
From a policy level, there's a lot of programs out there to support caregivers that are coming out that are taking time. So I could, send follow-up documents after this conversation. There's a lot going on, but it really, just because you make the policy, somebody has to implement it, right?
Yeah.
And so especially in companies, caregivers, because of discrimination, are afraid to admit they're caregivers. And some people don't even know they're caregivers. They may be like helping mom or dad, but because they're not, helping in hospitals or whatever, they don't see themselves as the word caregiver. So a lot of caregivers, most employers don't even know the number of caregivers they have because they don't talk about it, right? We talk about having kids. We talk about all the happy stuff. We don't talk about, I've got an aging parent, or my spouse is disabled, or I don't feel well, right? Companies have to start having more of those conversations. And what I'm seeing is even mid-sized companies are starting with employee resource groups for caregivers. And they're allowing these groups to bring in people like myself to talk about caregiving. They're talking about even on-site elder care benefits if people are still going to the office, more flexible work schedules, because let's face it, you got to take time off to take a parent to a doctor appointment, or maybe they have to go to a chemotherapy treatment, or they've got to get blood work done. I mean, there's things that you have to do between 8 and 5. And so just companies being more flexible and recognizing that, retaining valuable employees is good. I think the rate is like 30% of employees just quit because they think they don't have a choice. They're worried about their job performance. They're not going to get promoted. They don't feel like they're holding up their end of the bargain with the teams. I mean, companies have to start talking about this for this to change in corporations. That's what has to happen.
Yeah. Anything could be more disruptive to your working life or any other aspect of your life, other than knowing now that, maybe you've already raised your kids or something and you're older, and thinking that, now you're suddenly caregiving in a situation where you now have authority over somebody else who's had their own authority for years. And especially if it's a parent, because that switch of roles is not an easy transition to make. It's really kind of hard. I want to get to some of the questions because we put out, some requests for questions. I want to get to a couple of those real quick. And one of them had to do with the legal responsibilities of being a caregiver. You want to share that, Pamela?
Sure. So when talking about legal, I recommend talking about this as early as possible, even when there's no health issues. So the legal responsibilities are, if you are a person, you eventually want to appoint an agent who is your medical power of attorney, your financial power of attorney, who's going to take care of your affairs after you pass away. It's either a will or a trust. And the biggest thing is that because the legal aspects are so lawyers, attorneys, they're scary, right? Most people don't want to go see them. And we think that they're very expensive. But what most people don't realize is if you don't have this piece of paper and something happens, nobody can step in for you. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that I was in a hospital emergency room and the attorney was bringing the power of attorney documents and a notary to have the patient sign before they went in for surgery.
Yep.
You don't want to wait till the last minute because that's going to be a problem. The other thing is you have to have somebody you trust. So I used to get appointed because parents didn't think they had reliable children, or spouses didn't trust their children. So there are professionals that can be appointed, but mostly you want to find somebody in your family that you can trust to do these things. And so 2 mechanisms. One, there's forms you can download off the internet. I mean, in lieu of nothing else, 5 wishes forms you can download off the internet are better than nothing. But the challenge is every state has different rules and regulations. Okay. And I'm the person who's seen the 0.5 of 1% of disasters that happen. So client who's perfectly healthy today has a hip fracture, goes in tomorrow, esophagus gets damaged by being intubated. And she had a MOS form that says, I don't want a feeding tube. And I'm the power of attorney saying, medical error, we're doing a feeding tube if we need to. You have to have these things in your living will documents. You have to say, what if I have Alzheimer's and dementia and I eventually can't raise a fork to my mouth? Do I want to be fed? Do I want a feeding tube? Do I want all these things? We have to be able to talk about them. And so Medicare offers an annual wellness visit and an advanced care planning visit. So if you can't talk to your parents about these things, go with your parent to those appointments and let the doctors open the door. Then you can follow up and have the conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. I have a 5 wishes document for myself and my husband, because in North Carolina it's accepted as being legal, and literally downloaded it. And what I tell people a lot of times is download it, but put the answer somewhere else first. And then when you're sure about the answers, transfer them to the document. Otherwise you're $5 until you get it right. So
Well, and even the MOST form, which is medical scope of treatment, most states have a MOST or a POST. You've got to be very careful with those, because if you ever change your mind and you don't say, I'm rescinding the prior one date of this, a hospital could have an old MOST form on file, and they're going to rely on that instead
On
of
the
your
old
current
one.
one, which you
Exactly.
didn't have put into the system.
That actually happened to someone I know who passed away, and because the attorneys could, I know she had a new will, but they could not find it. So the only will that was on file with the clerk of court is the one they're using now. So, that's the shame of it all. But that 5 wishes serves as your living will and your healthcare power of attorney 2 in 1, and does ask some questions like what you were talking about of what you want to have happen if this happens, type of thing. So that helps. But you really do have to keep those things updated over a period of time.
You do, and there's a service,
look out.
the name is escaping me right now, but there's a service that you can actually upload your documents to. So if you go to the hospital, you say, call this 800 number, my most recent documents are on this portal. I'll send it to you after this,
Please
after
do.
we're done
We'll
talking.
share that
It's a great service.
details. Okay, we'll share that in the details, y'all, so you don't have to worry about it. Another question was, when to start thinking about paid care. If you've been caregiving for a while and you think mom or dad or whoever is maybe at that level, it's like with my mother, she got to 24/7 care at some point with her illnesses. And at that point it was a sibling conversation. I was blessed. My siblings were close enough we could meet together and say, this is where we're at. I think we're ready to have this conversation. So what do you say? Where is the line that people can start thinking about drawing that that in the sand, so to speak?
So for caregivers, it's a whole conversation of what can I do with my time, my time, available time and money and things like that. So there's 2 parts of this. So one is, when do you bring in paid care? And the next is, when do you move your parent out of the home into a care community? So you kind of have to set these gauges or these lines in the sand. Like, if I'm a caregiver and it's more than 20 hours a week, mom and dad, we have to start talking about paid care, which then brings in, is there money? Are we looking at Medicaid? All of that. You want to look at it way before you need to, because at the point where you need it, you're so burned out and you're so exhausted that you can't think about it. And it may take you 6 more months, which is not going to be good for your mental or your physical abilities. Same thing with moving a parent out of the home into a community. What's going to cause that? Mostly it's dementia. It's my parents awake all night and I have to work, and I can't be awake all night and go to work during the day. It's things like incontinence, things like advanced medical care, so they can't transfer. So I'm needing to use a Hoyer lift, or I'm having to change catheter bags, or things like that. It's the extreme that does happen a lot when parents need more care. They call it hospital at home, right? You're not going to the hospital anymore. The hospital is coming to the house, and you, that caregiver, are going to take blood sugars, and you're going to do insulin injections, and you're going to, change catheter bags, not the catheters, but the bags. You're going to be doing all this medical type work, and it gets very, very exhausting. So you really want to talk about it long before it's needed, so you have a plan. When you get to that, it's more than 20 hours a week. We got to look at this seriously. You're not sleeping 7 nights a week. We have to look at this seriously. You have to set guideposts.
Right. I think also then is a situation of looking at whoever's finances. If it's your parents' finances, that it can maybe be also another difficult conversation to have, but you have to do it. You have to look at what they're able to pay for.
What they can afford, and are they willing to? Because many times they don't want, so parents will refuse outside caregivers. They don't want strangers coming into the home, and they don't want to spend their money on that. They want it, you know, some parents want to say, well, you know, I want it for your, you know, after I'm gone, you can have this money. If you're a good child, you say, no, 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 we're going to spend your money on your care now because it helps
Mhm.
me. So sometimes caregivers have to approach it from the perspective of, look, I know you don't want this help, but I'm so stressed and I need to work and I need to take care of my kids. If you would get caregivers, it would really help me out with my work situation, with my children, with my husband, with my family, because I'm neglecting them. I don't want to make you feel guilty, but I'm neglecting them to care for you. So if
Mhm.
we could bring in a little bit of help, it would help all of us.
That's good. I think the last question I have, and then I'm gonna come back to Tsegga, is that somebody said, when to know when to take the keys away, and how do you have that conversation?
This is the tough one because you think you're taking the keys away, but you're actually taking independence away, right?
Yes.
It's
Mhm.
kind of like when you're young and you don't have a driver's license and your parents have to like take you everywhere, right? If you're going to do that, one, you have to know why you're doing it. So are you doing it because of a cognitive reason? If so, there is a program. It's not everywhere, but it's called Drive Able. And it's a program that evaluates the likelihood of somebody having a car accident. So
Oh, really?
you need a doctor's order. You go
Okay.
and it's a simulation and they're driving a car. And what
Wow.
you get out of this is there's a 75% chance that this person is going to have a car accident because of this. Now, my father was starting to have car accidents. He didn't have dementia, but he had back pain. And so he couldn't turn his head, you know, to like look in the other lane. Is it clear? For him, it was occupational therapy. So you have to understand the reason why the car concerns, the driving concerns are happening. See if they're solvable. If it's dementia, then it's a whole nother thing. And
Mhm.
sometimes the doctor has to write that order. You have to have the conversation. I can tell you that I've taken people who wanted to renew their licenses to the DMV, and the DMV felt sorry for them because they were older and they tried to help them pass the test. And I'm like, no, 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 no. This is like
You've
dementia.
got a good DMV.
I had to have an attorney show up one time to say, look, you cannot allow this woman to take her test 10 times. She has Alzheimer's, you know, and so you get a diagnosis, you send it to the DMV, you send it to health insurance. Because what people don't think about is I would have clients who say, I drive as good as I was driving when I was 14. And I'm like, yeah, but what about that child you're going to kill when you run the stop sign? And they're going to
Yeah.
sue you for every penny that you have. Then where are
Wow.
you going to be? That's what you
Yeah.
have to think about is who are you going to hurt?
So many things. Along that line, before I go to Tsegga, I do know that when Mama quit driving, we still needed to have an ID for her.
Yes, state
And we
ID.
ended up, how do you get it there? I mean, I think
Oh,
we
it's
ended up.
easy. You go to the DMV and you pay $1 and you get a state ID. The other thing
Yeah.
you have to have is you have to have transportation options for them. So you can't take away the car without like Uber or you coming every Saturday to go get
Yeah.
groceries or some
Yeah.
plan. You can't just end something and not have a plan to
Yeah,
continue the transportation.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for that. And that was one thing I didn't know until it hit me in the face is that we were going to have some other kind of ID because,
Yes.
you know, and then we needed it quick. So it's another one of those things that think about it before you have to have it. Tsegga, you're up again.
This is amazing. I was thinking, and I was thinking, I said, I don't think I have a notepad with me, but I definitely know that we're going to receive.
Well, it's recorded, so you got
So
that.
thank you. Yeah. So thank you for really showing us or sharing the experience that you have on, you know, thinking differently about how we're doing things right now. And I think for me, it looks like it's like there is a caretaking economy that goes into this. And that seems to be something that we have to invest in. And otherwise, we will not be successful and have a community of with all the wisdom that we have, not only in this room, this virtual room with the three of us, but I think there's so much for us to learn about the caregiving economy, which means how do we even employ the caregivers? You know, when you said when we decide to hire somebody, that is also, I mean, we have a girl here that comes and she's not as reliable. Not because she doesn't want to be reliable, but she seems to have also, this is her second job. She even wants to take a third job, which is so scary. So how do we?
She may need to. Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, and what you'll see because the caregivers, honestly, they're not paid enough, you know.
Yes.
So you'll have CNAs who work in nursing homes who do home care part-time, you know, so
Yes.
maybe it's a second job, or maybe they get called for something on call and they go do that. So when you're looking to hire caregivers, there's a couple of ways to do it. You can
Mhm.
obviously hire independently, which can be a little riskier because you are the employer, right? You have to do the background check. You have to make sure that they're cleared. You've got to make sure they're paying their taxes because you're paying them, right? So you more become the employer, but sometimes it's more affordable. And there are registries out there who offer people who want to work independently. And then there's care agencies. But I always go to, if you can find, if money's an issue, there are people, there are volunteers, right? The Area Agency on Aging is associated with a lot, like Volunteers of America here. There's a group called Retired Senior Volunteers who will volunteer if people don't have money to show up 4 hours a week to give you respite care or to allow you to take a parent to a doctor. So don't always think that you have to pay for this. I mean, many times that is the only way to do it. But there are volunteer organizations that will do this. And then if you pay, you either use an agency or you hire yourself. And so there's pros and cons of doing that. With the agency, at least if somebody's not going to show up, they should have a backup caregiver for you. Like you mentioned, Tsegga, your caregiver sometimes doesn't show up because maybe her car broke down or maybe something else came up and she can't be there. If you have somebody with Alzheimer's, you need somebody who's going to be there because they can't be alone.
Yes.
So then you have to go to agencies. And again, I always go back to Medicaid. If you can't afford this, find out about your state Medicaid program because they provide home and community-based services, caregivers that will come into the home 5 days a week, 4 hours a day, but you've got to know how to get there. And then, the VA, if somebody was a veteran, the VA has some type of benefits for home care. There's a lot out there, but you've got to explore what's available early enough before you need it.
So it helps. Yeah, I think you mentioned the respite care. I think this state, and I don't know if they still do Tsegga, but some other states may have this too. And this is where that Division of Aging regional office or whatever can answer for you. There are respite programs out there that will give you, like, for lack of a better term, chits or tickets or coupons or whatever for so many hours of care. So in other words, what will happen is you hire the person that will sit while you go off to grocery shopping or get your hair done, whatever you need to do for a couple of 3 hours, however many hours. And they will reimburse you for that fee of whatever you paid for that period of time. So there are some programs like that. In the case of memory care, not every county has this option. I think that in the next county over from us, they do. They have an adult daycare for memory care, for people with dementia and Alzheimer's and that sort of thing. And it's maybe a half a day or something like that. And that can give you some, a spell of relief. But at the same time, I think that's private pay. I don't think anything is gonna, pay for that. So any way you look at it, there's a dollar sign attached to it. So it's just not easy.
But there are grant programs like you mentioned. So I think it's either Title III or Title VIII through the Older Americans Act gives money to states and the Area Agency on Aging for grant programs for respite care. So, and some of that, like here in Colorado, it goes to Easter Seals or Jewish Family Services where there's no charge for the respite care.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
That's true.
look up those types of community-based
I
organizations.
think, there are, and I think that also if you look up your own county's aging services in our county where I used to work, we used the Baptist Men's Association to put in ramps in older people's houses where they, finally got into a wheelchair or something and needed to have a ramp. So to make it, disability efficient. And they'll also put in bars in your bathroom and things like that. So there are also some grants that will pay for the bars and the ramps. I know our Broad Street Clinic here in our area actually paid for a portable ramp. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a portable ramp. There are
they're aluminum, they're lightweight.
House. And so they paid for it to be in for a certain period of time, like, a year or 2 years or whatever. And then that gets returned after the person doesn't need anymore or whatever happens. But maybe they can get it extended, but there's all these different kinds of resources. You almost have to access maybe 3 or 4 different places. You may have to make a few phone calls, but they're there. It's just a matter of seeing what you can get for lowest cost possible and put the money where the energy is going to be spent taking care of the person that needs to be having the care. So I think that's the bottom line there.
And to that point, it can be time consuming. So CMS this year has a care coordination benefit for social determinants of health, which are a lot of the things you're talking about. So if you, so nurses and social workers in doctors' offices can get paid for this, for helping you find these resources, but you have to ask because they're not going to advertise it because it's more work for them, right? But
It
they
is.
actually now get reimbursed for it, so there's no reason not to do it. So just like chronic care coordination, if somebody over 65 has 2 or more conditions, there's a care coordination benefit for that. There's a care coordination benefit now for finding respite care and food insecurity and transportation and all of that that is reimbursed now
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
G codes.
Yeah. You know, we talked about this before. Sometimes you don't know what to ask because you don't know enough to ask
Right.
the right questions when you're in caregiving mode. And you don't even just assume that there is some kind of solution that's out there. So you just don't even bother.
You don't
to
ask.
that direction. So this is good. And almost think that we need a part B. of this, you know, but I want to end with Tsegga asking, you know, whatever else is on her mind or saying what else is on her mind, and then I'll give you the last the words there. So Tsegga.
Thank you again, Pamela. I'm against cloning, but I think if there was some moment to clone you, we think.
I wish I could, which is why you know, I answer caregiver questions all the time. There's so much to know. And I've been blessed to have been in the trenches on this for so long that I have the information.
Wonderful. This is really amazing. I think it's quite timely for me and for the many people that we have in our community and elsewhere. I want to thank you for the time and the privilege that we were able to listen to your story, and also the way you have been doing all this change makers work, which seems to be a place where none of us go through because of you know, access to resources, or just because we don't know, and what we don't know, we don't know.
Yeah.
And so
You don't know what you don't know. So
We don't
you
know.
don't even ask.
So
Yeah.
it's an enlightening hour for me and for the many people that get to listen. I'm hoping that we'll stay connected, and you share your expertise everywhere that we're able to get you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Great. Pamela, is there a final story you want to share from your experience, or that gives us a point that we should leave with?
You know, as caregivers, we become so stressed and we become so involved in what we need. I want to bring recognition to the other side, to the care receiver side, and the grief that they go through. So I had a client one time who I was her power of attorney for a long time, and she was a school teacher, very logical and everything. And it eventually got to the point where she needed to move out of her home because she was forgetting to eat, forgetting to take medications, even though we had caregivers in there. You know, it was the balance between now it's costing you $7,000 a month, assisted living would be $4,000. And so it's the process of, if you are that agent, you don't have the right to take over somebody's life, right? You can't make decisions for them. You want to act in a consultative manner if you can, and explain rationales if they can understand, to get them to agree before you push somebody to do something that they don't want to do. Because sometimes we as children, we get so impatient and we're like, Mom or Dad, you just have to do this, right? I can't do this anymore. We have to involve, because we have to understand that they're grieving. They're grieving the loss of their health, and they're seeing the end of life, and they're scared to death about diagnosis, and they don't want to go to the doctor, and they don't want to go to the hospital. You know, their fears are equally as great as our fears of having to take care of them.
Wow. So well put. So well put. I think sometimes we get so eat up with our own overwhelm that it's hard to, I mean, we have compassion clearly for the people that we care for, but when you get in that overwhelm mode, it just is more than we can, you know, more than we can handle sometimes. And so we go into that auto, you know,
we want to fix it.
Well, fix it or fly away from it or something.
Yes, or run away. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but you're right. I mean, you do have to care for yourself too, and that's one thing that we touched on just barely. But I think that the self-care has to kick in and
not negotiable.
Get way up there. And it's different for everybody, but you have to find that place, and sometimes you have to make the hard decision of peeling back on some other things. And hopefully not so much on work, or not so much on the caregiving of your own family, the normal things that you would do, but you as much as you can to kind of take care of your body and your own nutrition and your own mental and spiritual health, so that you can be that for other people, and, you know, show up for yourself too. So I wish for everybody that's watching here, yes, happy International Women's Day. And if you are one of those women who has lots of things on your plate, and maybe one of them is caregiving, then hopefully you have gotten a takeaway here, and that you know that you're among friends and women who care about you and want to make sure that you stay well and that you take care of yourself too. So thank you, ladies. If you'll hang with me for just a second, I'll say goodbye to everybody else. You know, we build bridges of peace and bridges of connection and bridges of impact every day. Frontrunners Innovate, Frontrunners Development, which is what I do. And this is one good example. So thank you to you Frontrunners, and thank you to everybody else watching. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Good day.